whole story of your being drawn to this subject, the subject you can't see or fully know, and in the pursuing it and immersing yourself, could be read as a way of finding form. And reading your books again in preparation for this, I was reminded of something Virginia Woolf said about To the Lighthouse, when she was beginning to write it. She said, I go down to the depths, and I got down to my depths and I made shapes square up. And I wanted to ask you first really about how the book Leviathan took shape. So you knew you had to write about this thing or your relation with this thing. But as you said to us just now, I'm not a scientist. And at that point, now there are quite a lot of books. There's this new term, which I don't particularly approve of, called creative nonfiction. I think it's because I don't like the word creative.
Yeah.
But that's, you were writing in a way, drawing together and finding form for something which hadn't happened before. And could you tell us a little bit about how the book took shape?
Well, I mean, so to backtrack a bit, I'd written a book called Spike Island, which is a story about a military hospital close to where I live in Southampton. And I'd been trying to find a way of writing about myself in relationship to this hospital, huge military hospital, stood from 1856 to 1966. So it brought in a lot of history and culture, but also relationship to me and all sorts of obsessions and fears, and a way of trying to incorporate that in a book. And it was halfway through writing that the film director I worked with, Adam Lowe, gave me a copy of The Rings of Saturn, Sebald's book, which I think, for many of us is a really influential book. I didn't know anything about him. Purposely, Adam told me nothing about him. He said, just read it, So I came to it very pure. I hadn't read Susan Sontag or anything, I didn't have any of the context. So it was for that reason, it had an incredibly powerful effect on me. And I'd already really written my book, but I suppose I kind of revised it in the knowledge that what was allowable. The way that Sebald talks about, when he was interviewed famously, he spoke about the way he was asked how he wrote, and he said, it's like when I take my dog for a walk in the field, and he lets the dog off her leash, and she wanders around the field, and she sniffs a bit there, and she sniffs a bit there, and comes back and tells him about it. And that's kind of what I felt like, and that's kind of what... So I suppose that's what I was applying, not really consciously, because I was just really externalizing my experiences, or maybe internalizing them actually in the book. So yeah, it's a mixture of all those things really.
So reading Sebald you felt as if it gave you permission to both walk a line and allow your senses and your memories and your associations and your curiosity the freedom to gather what it did and bring it back towards that line with that. I wonder why we felt why you felt you didn't have permission.
Oh, because I think if you're always told not to write I. Yes. If you work, especially as if you work as I worked as a reporter, the idea of using I feels shocking really, and also the very British retentiveness about speaking about oneself, one's emotions, about making clear sort of why, and also I suppose in a way that sometimes you're worried that you might give the game away, that the mystery evaporates if you start to explain or give context to something that sometimes is better not said in a way, maybe, I don't know. But but I suppose just that whole notion of also I suppose because structure, you have structure drummed into you, all throughout your sort of life really, from school upwards, and the idea of abandoning notion of traditional structure is scary, I think.
Do you think if you'd been writing a book about another subject, it would have taken the same shape? Or do you think the fact that you had this subject, which, as you said, you say about the whale, only as the distance between us increased, as the silence of her descent became hypnotic, was her enormity revealed, something I had seen and yet which I could not quite comprehend. And you talked wonderfully just now about how, we can't see the whale and we can't comprehend the scale, and it's beyond language. And therefore, in a sense, you had to place yourself within the subject. You had to be there in order to, because we could only travel this subject. We couldn't stand back and look at it. And I wondered if there was as much desire, because you said just now, I wanted to write about myself, and then you said we're not supposed to, whether you would have written out of that kind of immersive engagement, but being explicit about the self, or if it's the whale itself which kind of provokes that kind of relationship.
It's difficult without being sounding soppy, because whales do change you, because they alter the scale of the way you think. And they also, because of what they represent, because of that extraordinary psychic shift they've taken us through, to which they bear witness, pathetic witness, really, it's heartrending. And I don't want to analyze that, really, because it's a pure emotion. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a very good emotion for human beings. We ought to feel it,
I was struck by what you said about the only, I wrote it down, that there are no words for these animals, but at the same time you said, of course we invest them. And you're talking now about pathos. And again, these are things that we've been brought up as writers to be suspicious of, the pathetic and our own susceptibility. But what one of the great joys of your writing is you combine this extraordinary outward-looking curiosity and retention of detail and fact and so on, and resistance. You resist sentiment in that you bring us the full picture of what happens to your subject. But you insist on, if you like, the right of the human to engage fully, and that includes emotionally.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because I think a lot of nature writing, we were discussing this earlier, because a lot of nature writing shuts out the human. You watch nature programs on TV, when do you ever see a human being in them? It projects some impossible utopian world where these animals gamble and frolic and occasionally get mauled and killed, but it's all outside, human context or contact at all. It's laughable, really.
Well, I suppose it's as if there's this idea that if you pretend that the human presence isn't there, that you attain some sort of objective authority. That
supposedly
in filming you're not interfering. That
supposedly.
We haven't sort of opened the cupboard to see if the cat is dead.
But that's the same with nature writing as well, because a lot of nature. I mean, there's some brilliant nature writers about, but often you're given quite rarefied experiences, which are beyond most people. We don't all live in country cottages and write these wonderful sort of journals where and I know I'm sort of reducing it a little, but still there's quite a lot of that in it. When you read it, it's
yes, I think I object to that when it's pretending to not be that. And Sebald has a lot to answer for as well. I think he's a dangerous influence because he was incredibly artful, as we were talking earlier about this, and he made up and reconstructed and invented because his was a psychic landscape, and it is read as with a kind of capital R romantic sense of capital A authenticity, which was not his project.
No.
And this idea that we are not having a subjective
Yeah.
experience of what we're immersed in, what we're engaged with.
Exactly.
Seems mistaken.
No, very interesting.
I wanted to ask you a bit, when you were growing up, you talk about using a notebook and finding this old notebook of yours. And you said, alongside the blank verse and stream of consciousness lyrics were doodles, pictures of whales, 70s glam rock stars, 1920s decadent figures, all of my obsessions, the whole of my career planned out at the age of 14. I thought, why have I bothered? And in Leviathan, and as you said now, you talk about where I have no knowledge of what lies below. So that need, when you're starting out to write something, of not knowing where you're going. So you look back and thought, oh God, I knew where I was going. I wish I hadn't.
No,
Kind
exactly.
of thing. But again, the subjects you choose, the sea, the whale, that sense of entering something that's taking form for you. But how important is the not knowing where you're going?
Really important. I never structure my books, you know. I don't. Otherwise, it's like homework. It's like colouring by numbers. You just might just fill them in, you know. It's the experience for me, and is within the experience that as it plays out that you find what you are writing about. That's the way you find out, I think, and I think that's quite a natural way. I think even more so now, actually, given the way that we receive information now a lot through the internet, you know, there's something very wonderful about that. It's quite organic about that in a way, you know, the way that you follow these strange, you know, foxholes.
Yes.
You know, why dismiss that? I think that's a wonderful, and that's after all, that's only a reflection of human ingenuity and human creativity, I think, you know. So that's really interesting. But what I also find is it's always the other that always interests me, you know, whether or not, you know, whatever that other represents. And it's because I grew up as a suburban schoolboy in Southampton, you know, no cultural influences. My father never read a book, as far as I know. My mother did read, but, you know, they barely received any secondary education, from let alone tertiary education. So what I created for myself was really self-created and found from very strange sources. In the way, you know, I don't know what I would be like if I was growing up now. It's very interesting. My nieces and nephews, you know, they're all in their late teens now. They have access to everything. You know, when you and I wanted to listen to music, we had to save up, number one, go down the shop, buy a piece of vinyl, take it out of the sleeve, look longingly at these images, which took us into another world anyway, whilst this physical thing of a needle on a piece of plastic was playing out. That was such an extraordinary connection. People now don't have that, although vinyl is fashionable again, people don't have that connection, but they do have extraordinary access to everything. So when I talk to my nephew about David Bowie, he doesn't think of me as some crumbly old relic from the past. He knows David Bowie's still alive. David Bowie is still the Thin White Duke to him, you know, or Ziggy Stardust, whoever he was, the persona he adopted. So I think it's a very interesting aspect. I mean, that's, for me, a lot of it is to do with music, a lot of it's to do with punk, as you were speaking about yesterday, and, you know, some of the things you were speaking about yesterday was very, you know, we come from a similar background and similar thing, and so I think that, yes, I think that music, because of the way music acts to, you know, especially someone like Bowie, who drew in so many other references, whether he was a vampire or not, or is a vampire, from art and literature and science. Don't quote me on that, please.
Globally live streamed.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Say hello to David.
Hi, Dave. But yeah, so I think, you know, someone like Bowie. I don't know what he's a bit older for you, you know, but for me, he was the great sort of.
Well, he's the great shapeshifter, and you talk about the whale as the great shapeshifter, and the the subjects of your biographies are shapeshifters, and so and your books are shapeshifters, and so it seems to me. I mean, it came immediately to mind when I thought about form intention, because this ability to find these subjects and to produce books which remain true to that shape-shifting nature and don't pin it down and
absolutely
cut it open.
And retain that childlike sense of excitement.
Yeah.
I get very, as you see, I get very overexcited about things because
it's
they
lovely.
still excite me.
Yeah.
I refuse to be, you know, made cynical about these things. These are miraculous things. I mean, we're only alive. I've only got another couple of decades, you know. What is the point of being cynical about it?